This isn't for you." The pilot's words were low, a casual dismissal coated in steel. He held her first-class boarding pass between a thumb and forefinger, the glossy paper a stark white against his tanned skin. His name tag read Thorne, Captain M. Thorne. He didn't look at her face, only at the pass, as if it were a counterfeit bill passed by a clumsy amateur. The air in the jet bridge was stale and cool, smelling of recycled oxygen and industrial carpet. Behind her, the line of remaining first-class passengers shuffled, their carry-on bags bumping softly. Through the small windows, the morning sun glinted off the fuselage of the massive plane. Phones were rising, small dark rectangles held in uncertain hands, catching the light. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and a faint, nervous excitement. She stood perfectly still, her leather briefcase in her left hand, her purse over her right shoulder. She did not react. Her face remained a mask of serene neutrality. She had learned a long time ago that the first person to lose their composure in a conflict loses everything else, too. What Captain Thorne didn't know, what the shuffling passengers and the flight attendant hovering nervously at the cabin door didn't know, was that Judge Annalise Hayes was not just another passenger. She was the senior auditor for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and her briefcase contained the preliminary framework for a 21-day operational audit of this very airline, Apex Air, an audit with the power to ground their entire fleet, and Captain Thorne, with one contemptuous flick of his wrist, had just made himself Exhibit A. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The day had begun as it always did, in stillness. The first light of dawn was the color of weak tea, filtering through the tall windows of her brownstone in Washington, D.C. Annalise sat in her worn leather armchair, a cup of black coffee warming her hands. The smell of the dark roast, a special blend from a small shop in her neighborhood, was the first sensory anchor of her day. It was a ritual, the coffee, the quiet, the light. These were the things that centered her before the world began making its demands. For 40 years, first as a prosecutor, then for 3 decades as a federal judge, this ritual had been her silent preparation for the chaos of the courtroom, for the weight of decisions that altered lives. Now in her semi-retirement role with the DOJ, it was no different. The work was just quieter, the battles fought in conference rooms and spreadsheets instead of open court. But the stakes felt just as high. Her son, David, had called the night before. "You sure you want to do this, Mom? 21 days in Dallas in July?" He was a partner at a corporate law firm now, his voice always carrying a baseline of gentle concern. She had smiled, picturing his face. "The work needs doing, David, and someone has to make sure these consent decrees are more than just expensive wallpaper. I know, just be careful. Airlines are a world unto themselves. They don't like outsiders." "I've been an outsider my whole life," she'd replied. The words a simple statement of fact. "It's where I do my best work." Now, looking around her living room, at the shelves crowded with law books and the framed photos of her late husband, of David as a boy, of her parents standing proudly on the day she was sworn in, she felt a familiar surge of purpose. This wasn't just a job. It was a continuation of a promise she had made to her father, a railroad porter who had endured 1,000 daily humiliations with a quiet dignity that she had inherited like a birthright. He taught her that you don't fight indignity with rage. You fight it with excellence, with preparation, and with an unshakable belief in your own worth. She finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it precisely in the dishwasher. Her movements were always deliberate, economical, not a wasted gesture. It was a discipline honed on the bench where every nod, every glance, could be interpreted, misread, or appealed. She dressed in her travel attire, tailored black trousers, a silk shell, and a soft gray cardigan. Comfortable but professional. Understated, she clipped a small silver pin to her lapel, a stylized scale of justice, a gift from her husband the day she passed the bar. It was her one piece of overt symbolism, a quiet reminder to herself of the work. Her bag was already packed, standing by the door, one large suitcase for the 21-day stay, and her leather briefcase. Inside the briefcase, beneath a fresh legal pad and a row of perfectly sharpened pencils, was the initial DOJ directive for the operational compliance audit of Apex Air. It was a follow-up to a consent decree signed 2 years prior, after a string of high-profile discrimination complaints. The airline had promised reforms, new training, and better oversight. Analyst's job was to determine if they had kept that promise. The language of the directive was cold, bureaucratic, but its intent was deeply human. It was about ensuring that every single person who bought a ticket was treated with baseline dignity. It was about the machine of the system, and her job was to inspect its gears for rust, for rot, for intentional malice. A car service was waiting at the curb, the driver holding the door as she approached. The drive to Reagan National was smooth, the early morning traffic still light. The city slid by, monuments of marble and granite catching the strengthening sun. She felt the familiar, low-grade hum of anticipation that came before any major undertaking. It wasn't anxiety, it was focus, a gathering of self. The kind of focus that let you feel the weight of your own heartbeat in the quiet moments before a verdict was read. She had 21 days of leave from her quiet life, 21 days to immerse herself in the culture of a multi-billion-dollar corporation and find the truth. She checked her watch. 6:15 a.m. her flight, Apex Air 712 to Dallas-Fort Worth, was scheduled for 8:30 a.m., plenty of time. She had learned a long time ago that being early was not just about punctuality. It was a position of strategic advantage. It allowed you to observe. The airport was already a river of humanity. The sounds were a familiar symphony, the rumble of rolling suitcases, the distant, garbled announcements, the murmur of 1,000 conversations. Annalise navigated it with an accustomed ease. She had the clear service and TSA pre-check, privileges of her government work and frequent travel. She moved through security in under 5 minutes, her briefcase gliding through the scanner without issue. She didn't have to remove her shoes or her light cardigan. The system was designed for efficiency, for trusted travelers. A small, ironic smile touched her lips. The system worked when it was allowed to. Her gate was C-28. She found it easily and saw the flight was on time. The waiting area was clean, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. She bought a bottle of water and found a seat away from the main cluster of passengers, near a charging station. She plugged in her phone and opened her briefcase, pulling out not the DOJ documents, but a slim volume of poetry by Gwendolyn Brooks. She read for nearly an hour, the sharp, beautiful lines a quiet counterpoint to the airport's sterile bustle. Reading poetry was another of her rituals, a way to keep her mind attuned to the nuances of language, to the power of a single well-chosen word. At 7:45 a.m., the gate agent, a cheerful woman with a bright scarf, announced the pre-boarding for passengers needing extra assistance and families with small children. Then came the military, and then first class. Annalise closed her book, placed it back in her briefcase, and stood. She smoothed her cardigan and walked toward the boarding lane. Her ticket was a first-class upgrade, a standard part of her travel authorization for long-haul work assignments. It wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity, providing the space and quiet to work or rest effectively before hitting the ground running. She handed her boarding pass and ID to the gate agent. The woman scanned it. "Welcome aboard, Judge Hayes," she said with a warm, professional smile. "Have a wonderful flight to Dallas. You're in seat 2A. "Thank you," Annalise replied, taking back her documents. She walked down the jet bridge, the soft thump of her low heels on the carpeted ramp a steady rhythm. The air grew cooler as she neared the aircraft door. A flight attendant greeted her with a practiced smile, gesturing her to the left into the hushed tones of the first-class cabin. Annalise saw her seat 2A, a spacious pod by the window. She was about to move toward it when a figure blocked her path. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of sun-weathered face that spoke of years spent above the clouds. He wore the 4 stripes of a captain on his epaulettes. His posture was rigid, his arms crossed over his chest. "Captain M. Thorne, can I help you?" he asked. The question was not an offer of assistance. It was a challenge. Annalise held up her boarding pass. "Good morning, Captain. I'm in 2A. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, flicked from her face down to the pass, then back up. A small, tight muscle in his jaw twitched. He held out his hand, not in greeting, but in demand. She placed the boarding pass in his palm. He looked at it for a long moment, turning it over as if inspecting it for flaws. The silence that followed lasted about 3 seconds, but it felt stretched, weighted. "There must be a mistake," he said, his voice flat. He wasn't looking at her, but past her, toward the gate agent who was now peering into the cabin with a confused expression. "I don't believe so," Annalise said, her own voice perfectly level. The gate agent just confirmed it. That was when he looked at her, really looked at her. And in that look, she saw it all, the casual contempt, the ingrained assumption, the inability to reconcile her face, the face of a black woman of a certain age, with the seat number printed on the ticket. It was a look she had seen 1,000 times in her 62 years, on the faces of police officers, opposing counsel, shopkeepers, and even once or twice fellow judges. It was the look of a world that had decided who she was and who she wasn't before she ever opened her mouth. He gave a short, derisive puff of air. "Yeah, well, she's new." He held the pass up to the light of the cabin. "These upgrades are reserved for our highest-tier loyalty members." The implication hung in the air, thick and foul, that she couldn't possibly be one. "My ticket was booked through a corporate travel portal," she stated simply. A fact, not an argument. "It was confirmed yesterday," he smirked then. It was a small, ugly thing, a slight upturn of one side of his mouth. It was an expression of absolute power, the petty tyranny of a man in a uniform who believed the rules were his to interpret and enforce. He took a step closer, crowding her space, forcing her to tilt her head back slightly to maintain eye contact. It was a classic intimidation tactic, performative authority. "This," he said, his voice dropping to that low, steely tone she would remember with perfect clarity, "isn't for you." And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he ripped the boarding pass in half. He didn't just tear it, he made a show of it, a sharp, violent sound that cut through the quiet of the cabin. Then he tore the 2 halves into quarters. The crisp white pieces of paper fluttered from his fingers and landed on the navy blue carpet at her feet, like confetti at a funeral. Annalise did not flinch, she did not gasp, she did not speak. She simply watched the pieces fall. She looked at the torn paper on the floor, then back up at his face. Her expression did not change. She felt the humiliation the way one feels a sudden drop in temperature, a cold shock that travels up the spine. But she let herself feel it for exactly 3 seconds. She took one slow, deep breath, then another. She was counting. In her mind, she was already moving past the feeling and into the next phase. The methodical gathering of facts, the documentation of the offense, the first quiet steps of the counterattack. This was no longer just an audit of Apex Air Systems. It was now a case study, and Captain Thorne was its star witness. The flight attendant at the door, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes, finally spoke. "Captain, maybe we should just—" Thorne cut her off with a sharp glance. "Stay out of this, Sarah." He turned his attention back to Annalise, his posture broadcasting dominance for the other passengers who were now openly staring, their phones held a little more steadily. "You're holding up my flight. You need to deplane now." "On what grounds?" Annalise asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of legal precision. It was the kind of question that demanded a specific, justifiable answer, the kind of question that made people who relied on bluster and authority suddenly falter. Thorne was momentarily thrown. He had expected shouting, crying, pleading. He had not expected a calm, direct legal query. "On the grounds that you are causing a disturbance," he snapped, his voice a little too loud. "You're being disruptive." "I have not raised my voice," Annalise said, her tone still conversational. "I have not made any threatening gestures. I have simply stood here while you destroyed my boarding pass and ordered me off the aircraft." "Who, precisely, is being disruptive?" Something moved behind his eyes. A flicker of uncertainty, quickly replaced by a doubling down of aggression. He was a man unaccustomed to being questioned. He reached for his radio, his hand moving with a practiced smoothness. "This is the captain. I need ground security at the jet bridge for 712. I have a non-compliant passenger." Non-compliant. The word was a weapon, a bureaucratic term designed to strip a person of their legitimacy, to paint them as the problem. Annalise recognized it instantly. It was the first brick in the wall of a false report. She made a mental note. Time, 8:02 a.m. location, aircraft door, flight 712. Offense. Falsely labeling a passenger as non-compliant to justify removal, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not to him, to herself. The audit had officially begun. The silence on the jet bridge was now absolute. The passengers behind her had stopped moving entirely. The young flight attendant, Sarah, looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Through the cabin door, Annalise could see other first-class passengers peering over their seats, their expressions a mix of alarm and morbid fascination. The pieces of her torn boarding pass were still on the floor, a small, sad pile of evidence. Annalise made no move to pick them up. Let them lie. Let everyone see. 2 airport police officers arrived within minutes. They were large men, their uniforms crisp, their faces impassive. They moved with a heavy, deliberate tread that announced their authority. One was older with graying temples. The other looked younger, more eager. "Captain Thorne?" the older officer asked, his voice a low rumble. "Right here," Thorne said, gesturing with his chin toward Annalise. "This woman is refusing to deplane. She doesn't have a valid ticket for this cabin, and she's become disruptive." The older officer turned his gaze to Annalise. It was a flat, assessing look. He saw a well-dressed, middle-aged black woman standing quietly. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" "That is what I have been trying to ascertain, officer," Annalise said calmly. She did not look at Thorne. She addressed the officer directly, respectfully. "The gate agent scanned my boarding pass and welcomed me aboard for seat 2A. When I reached the cabin, the captain here informed me there was a mistake, took my boarding pass and destroyed it." She gestured with her eyes to the paper on the floor. "He then ordered me to leave the aircraft." The younger officer glanced down at the torn pieces of paper, then back at Thorne. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. The story didn't quite line up. People who were being disruptive didn't usually speak with the measured cadence of a college professor. The captain, sensing a loss of control, bristled. She was argumentative. "I have a flight to get off the ground. My decision is final. She needs to go." His hand rested near his hip, a gesture of ingrained command. He was performing for his audience, the officers, the crew, the passengers. He was reasserting his dominance. The older officer sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had seen this scene play out 100 times in 100 different ways. It was the sigh of a man who knew his job was not to find the truth, but to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. And in the rigid hierarchy of the airport, a pilot's word on his own aircraft was law. "Ma'am," the officer said, his tone shifting from inquiry to instruction, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us back to the gate area." "I understand," Annalise said. She gave a small nod. This was not the time or place for a protracted legal battle. Comply physically, assert rights verbally. That was the rule. "But for the record, I am complying under protest. I have a valid ticket for this flight, and I am being removed without cause at the captain's discretion." She used the specific phrase, "at the captain's discretion," for a reason. It was language that would appear in any official report, language that had specific legal and administrative meaning. It acknowledged his authority while simultaneously flagging it as the sole reason for the action. She was building her case, word by word. She turned, her movements slow and deliberate, and walked back up the jet bridge, the 2 officers flanking her. She did not look back. As she passed the gate, she saw the agent who had checked her in. The woman's face was a knot of anxiety and helplessness. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Annalise gave her a tiny reassuring nod. An act of grace the woman did not expect. It said, "This is not your fault, but it will be accounted for." As she stepped into the terminal, a man in a rumpled supervisor's vest was waiting. His name tag read Henderson. He had the harried look of a mid-level manager whose primary job was to make problems disappear. "What's the situation here?" he asked, directing the question to the officers, but looking at Annalise with unconcealed annoyance. Captain's decision, the older officer said with a shrug. He wants her off the flight. Henderson let out an exasperated breath. He turned to Annalise. Look, I don't know what happened on there, but Captain Thorne has the final say. We can get you on the next flight to Dallas. It leaves in 3 hours. There's a middle seat in economy. The offer was an insult wrapped in a solution. Not just a downgrade, but the casual assumption that she should be grateful for it. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't investigate. He was part of the machine, a cog whose function was to protect the more powerful cogs. The machine was working exactly as it was designed to. My ticket is for first class on flight 712, Annalise stated, her voice still quiet, still firm. Apex Air has, through its agent Captain Thorne, refused me passage. That is a breach of the carriage contract. I require a new first-class ticket on the next available flight, and I will need a copy of the incident report that Captain Thorne will inevitably file. Henderson blinked. The words breach of carriage contract and incident report were not what he was used to hearing. He was used to tears or yelling. This calm, precise language was disarming. Now hold on, he said, putting his hands up. There's no need for all that. Let's just get you rebooked. I will be happy to be rebooked, Annalise said, after you provide me with the name and employee number of the captain, and confirmation that an official report will be filed regarding this incident. I will also be filing my own complaint, and I need his information to do so. This was a critical step, forcing the creation of a paper trail. An official report, even a false one, was a document. It was evidence. It could be subpoenaed. It could be cross-referenced. A verbal complaint that Henderson smoothed over would disappear into the ether. Henderson's face soured. This was becoming complicated. It was becoming paperwork. Look, ma'am, he started, his tone condescending. My name is Judge Annalise Hayes, she said, cutting him off, her voice still level but now with an added layer of ice. She rarely used her title in civilian life, but she would use any tool at her disposal when necessary. I have been a federal officer for 30 years. I am familiar with reporting procedures. Please provide me with the information I requested. Where Judge landed with a soft thud. The officers shifted their weight. Henderson's eyes widened slightly. He looked from her face to her expensive-looking briefcase to her calm, unshakable posture. A seed of doubt was planted. Maybe this wasn't the simple case of a disgruntled passenger he had assumed. But the instinct to protect the pilot, the captain, the king of the castle, was stronger. I'll see what I can do, he stammered. Wait here. He bustled off toward the gate, pulling out his phone. Annalise stood her ground, ignoring the stares of passers-by. She took out her own phone. She let herself feel the anger for exactly 90 seconds, a hot, tight coil in her chest, the sheer naked racism of it, the public humiliation, the abuse of power. She let the feeling wash over her, acknowledged it, named it, then she let it go. Anger was fuel, but it was a volatile one. It needed to be refined into something more potent, resolve. Her fingers moved deftly across the screen. First, a text to her son, David. Incident at the airport. I'm fine. We'll be on a later flight. We'll call when I can. Next, an email to her direct subordinate at the DOJ, a sharp young lawyer named Ben Carter. The subject line was simple, Apex Air Audit Preliminary Field Note. The body of the email was concise, devoid of emotion. It was a report. Ben Ree, Apex Air Compliance Audit. Please note the following for the initial audit file. Date, July 12, time approximately 2 a.m. EST. Location, DCA, Gate C28, Flight AA712 to DFW. Incident, denied boarding for confirmed first-class seat 2A. Agent, Captain M. Thorne. Action, boarding pass was physically destroyed by Captain Thorne. Was verbally labeled disruptive and non-compliant without cause. Removed from aircraft by airport police under protest. Supervisory response. Gate Supervisor Henderson offered alternate travel without investigating the complaint. I will be taking a later flight. The formal audit will commence as scheduled on Monday. However, I want you to begin a separate file immediately. Subject, Captain Mark Thorne. Employee number to follow. Cross-reference his record for any prior complaints, formal or informal, of discriminatory behavior, passenger disputes, or abuse of authority. Use the full scope of our divisional access. I want to know everything about him by the time I land in Dallas. Annalise Hayes, she hit send. The email disappeared into the digital ether, a small, quiet declaration of war. The machine of the airline had tried to crush her. Now a different kind of machine, a much older and more powerful one, was beginning to turn its gears, the machine of justice. The 3 hours she had to wait for the next flight were a study in controlled patience. Supervisor Henderson returned after a long, hushed phone call. He avoided her eyes. All right, ma'am, we've got you a seat on the 11:30 flight. He handed her a newly printed boarding pass. It was for a seat in the last row of the plane next to the lavatories. He did not mention her request for a first-class ticket. He did not offer an apology. And the incident report? Annalise asked. The captain will file his report as per standard procedure, Henderson said evasively. He handed her a small card. This has the number for our customer care line. You can file your complaint there. It was a dismissal. A bureaucratic dead end designed to exhaust and frustrate. Thank you, Annalise said, taking the card. And the captain's full name and employee number? Henderson hesitated. It's just Captain Thorne. I will need his employee number for my report to the Department of Transportation and the FAA, she said, her voice dropping a half octave. The mention of the federal agencies, the specific regulators of his profession, was a strategic escalation. It was a reminder that his authority was not absolute. It was granted, and it could be revoked. Henderson's face paled slightly. He scribbled a number on a piece of paper. "Look, Judge, it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding is when two people interpret a situation differently," Analyze corrected him gently. "This was an action, a deliberate action. There was no misunderstanding." She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. She did not thank him again. She found a quiet corner in the far end of the terminal, away from the bustle of her new gate. She sat down, placed her briefcase on the seat next to her, and took a deep breath. The adrenaline from the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. She thought of her father, standing straight and proud in his porter's uniform, absorbing insults with a grace that was its own form of resistance. He had taught her that dignity was not something others could give or take away. It was a fortress you built inside yourself, brick by brick, with every act of integrity, every refusal to be diminished. She pulled out her phone and called her son. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" David's voice was tight with worry. "I'm perfectly fine, David. Just inconvenience," she said, her tone soothing. She recounted the events briefly, factually, leaving out the emotional sting. She told him about the torn past, the captain's words, the police escort. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When David spoke, his voice was low, furious. "I'm booking a flight to Dallas." "No," she said firmly. "You will do no such thing. You have a firm to run. I have a job to do." "This isn't about your job, Mom. This is wrong. This man can't get away with this." "He won't," she said. The certainty in her voice was absolute, but it has to be done the right way, methodically. "By the book, my book." She paused. "This incident is no longer just about me, David. It's about the audit, it's data, it's a perfect, unassailable example of the very thing I was sent here to investigate. The man handed me a gift." David was quiet for a moment. He knew that tone. It was the same tone she used before delivering a verdict, the sound of a decision made, a path chosen. "What do you need from me?" he finally asked. "Nothing right now. Just to know that you're there." "Be my anchor," she said, using their old phrase. "I have the rest handled. Always, Mom." They spoke for a few more minutes, about his work, about his family. The conversation was a deliberate return to normalcy, a way of grounding herself. After she hung up, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The family anchor was in place. The professional ally was at work. Now she just had to wait. A young woman approached her table hesitantly. She looked like a college student, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a phone clutched in her hand. Her face was earnest, nervous. "Excuse me, Judge Hayes," she whispered, stumbling over the title. Annalise looked up. "Yes, my name is Maya. I was in the line behind you, on the jet bridge." She gestured vaguely with her phone. "I saw what he did, the pilot. I recorded it." Annalise felt a current pass through her, the witness. "You did?" Maya nodded, her eyes wide. "I started recording when he started talking to you. It just felt wrong. I got everything. Him tearing the ticket, what he said, the police coming." She swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. It was awful." Annalise gave her a small, warm smile. It was the first genuine smile she had managed in over an hour. "Thank you, Maya. That was a very brave and principled thing to do. I wanted to give it to you, or post it, or something. I'm just so angry for you." Annalise considered this for a moment. A viral video would be satisfying. It would bring immediate public shame upon Thorne and the airline. But it would also be messy. It would make the story about public outrage, not systemic failure. It would allow the airline to fire Thorne, issue a public apology, and claim the problem was solved. A single bad apple, not a rotten orchard. That was not the justice she was seeking. "Maya," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "what you have is very important. It's evidence. And evidence is most powerful when it is deployed at the right time, in the right place. Can I ask you to do something for me?" "Anything." Maya said immediately. "Don't post it, not yet. Hold on to it. Email a copy to yourself so it's time-stamped. And email a copy to me at my private address." She took out one of her personal cards, not the DOJ one, and wrote her Gmail address on the back. "This needs to be part of a formal record, not just a social media storm. Can you trust me to handle this properly?" Maya looked at the card, then back at Annalise's calm, steady face. She saw not a victim, but a commander. "Yes," she said, her voice full of conviction. "I can. Thank you." Annalise said again, "You've done a great service today." As Maya walked away, Annalise felt the final piece of the initial phase click into place. She now had her own testimony, the corroborating report from her DOJ colleague, and objective, irrefutable video evidence from a third-party witness. Captain Thorne's smug act of tearing up a piece of paper had created a perfect self-contained legal case against him, and he had no idea. He was flying at 35,000 feet, believing he had won. He couldn't have been more wrong. The flight to Dallas was a stark contrast to the one she was supposed to be on. Wedged into a narrow middle seat, her knees bumping against the seat in front of her, Annalise felt the physical indignity of the downgrade. The air was thick with the smell of recycled food and disinfectant. The constant traffic to and from the lavatories was a minor but persistent annoyance, yet she found a strange sort of clarity in the discomfort. It was a visceral reminder of what was at stake. This was how most people flew. This was the experience that the airline was supposed to make, if not pleasant, at least dignified. The luxury of first class was a privilege, but respectful treatment was a right. She did not work, she did not read. Instead, she closed her eyes and methodically cataloged the day's events in her mind, arranging them like files in a cabinet. The captain's words, his smirk, the sound of the tearing paper, Henderson's dismissiveness, Maya's frightened eyes. Each detail was a data point. Each emotion was a footnote. This was how she transformed personal injury into professional purpose. She was no longer Analyze Hayes, the humiliated passenger. She was Judge Hayes, the auditor, and this was all just part of the audit. When she landed at DFW, it was late afternoon. The Texas heat hit her like a physical blow the moment she stepped out of the terminal. She collected her luggage and took a taxi to her hotel, a long-term stay residence she had booked for the 21-day assignment. The room was a simple suite, with a small kitchenette and a separate living area that would serve as her office. It was anonymous, sterile, and perfect for her needs. The first thing she did was unpack, putting her clothes away, arranging her books and files on the desk, setting up her laptop. It was an act of reclaiming order, of imposing her own deliberate structure on the chaos of the day. As she worked, her phone buzzed. It was an email from Ben Carter at the DOJ. Subject: Re-Apex Air Audit, Preliminary Field Note Judge. File on Captain Mark Thorne established. Initial search of internal grievance databases, leveraging our access under the consent decree, is complete. The results are significant. Over the past 5 years, Thorne has been the subject of 17 informal passenger complaints and 4 formal complaints. Allegations range from rude and unprofessional conduct to specific accusations of discriminatory language and behavior. 2 formal complaints were from other Apex employees. Patterns. Allegations disproportionately involve female passengers and passengers of color. A common theme is Thorne challenging the validity of premium class tickets or upgrades, often in a public and demeaning manner. Disposition. All 17 informal complaints were marked unfounded or resolved at the supervisory level, with no record of Thorne ever being interviewed. The 4 formal complaints, 3 were dismissed by Apex's internal review board for insufficient evidence. The 4th, filed by a flight attendant 2 years ago, resulted in a letter of counseling being placed in Thorne's file. The letter was removed after 6 months per union agreement. I've attached the full file. It's a classic pass-the-trash scenario. The system isn't failing to catch him. It's actively working to protect him. The video file from the witness, Maya, has also been received and logged as evidence. It is damning. Let me know your next move. Ben Annalise sat down heavily in her desk chair. She read the email twice. It was worse than she had imagined. Not a single bad day, a career of it, a pattern of behavior so clear, so consistent, that the airline's failure to act was not just negligence. It was complicity. The machine wasn't just rusty. It was designed to protect its most toxic parts. Captain Thorne was not an anomaly. He was a feature of the system. She opened the attached file and began to read through the complaints, one by one. The language was heartbreakingly familiar. He spoke to me like I was a child. He loudly questioned my ability to afford my ticket in front of everyone. He seemed to enjoy humiliating me. These were not the words of disgruntled customers seeking a voucher. They were the words of people who had been stripped of their dignity. Annalise felt a cold, slow-burning anger rise within her, not from personal insult, from a deep judicial fury at the systemic injustice of it all. The airline had signed a consent decree, a solemn promise to the United States government to fix this exact problem. They had taken the government's money, attended the seminars, printed the posters, and all the while, men like Thorne were allowed to operate with impunity. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, Judge Hayes. My name is Margaret. I have been a flight attendant with Apex for 28 years. I was on the DFW LHR flight this evening and heard crew talking about what happened on 7/12 this morning. It's not the first time with Captain Thorne, not by a long shot. I have records. If you are who they say you are, and you are here to finally do something about it, I can help. I am on a 2-day layover here in Dallas. Annalise stared at the message. The elder. The one who had been watching, waiting, the one who kept the records. She typed back a simple reply. Margaret, thank you. Where and when can we meet? The response was immediate. There is a small coffee shop called the Daily Grind 2 blocks from your hotel. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. I will be in a corner booth with a copy of Moby Dick. Annalise put the phone down, the box of evidence. She had a feeling Margaret was bringing the box. The pieces were not just falling into place. They were accelerating toward one another with an unstoppable magnetic force. The 21-day audit had just been redefined. It was no longer a general inspection. It now had a laser focus, a clear and undeniable target. She would audit the entire system through the lens of this one man. She would follow the rot from the jet bridge, through the supervisor's office, through the internal review board, all the way to the executive suite that allowed it to fester. She slept for 6 hours, a deep and dreamless sleep. She awoke before dawn, the sky outside her hotel window a dark bruised purple. She made coffee in the small machine, the smell a comforting echo of her morning ritual back home. She sat at the desk, the files on Thorne open on her laptop, the text from Margaret on her phone, the video from Maya saved to a secure drive. This was the quiet before the storm, the moment of preparation. She drank her coffee and began to outline her strategy, her pen moving across a fresh legal pad. Her handwriting was a neat, precise script, the handwriting of a woman who had signed thousands of legal orders. Today she was writing a different kind of order. At 7:45 a.m., she left the hotel. The Dallas air was already thick and humid. She walked the 2 blocks to the Daily Grind. It was a small, unassuming place, filled with the rich smell of coffee and pastries. In a worn vinyl booth in the back corner, a woman with short, graying hair and intelligent eyes looked up from a thick, battered copy of Moby Dick as Annalise approached. She had the poised, observant air of a career flight attendant. This was Margaret. Judge Hayes, she said, her voice quiet but steady. She gestured to the seat opposite her. Margaret, thank you for reaching out, Annalise said, sliding into the booth. Margaret did not waste time with pleasantries. She pushed a thick, worn manila folder across the table. I started this about 10 years ago, she said. Not just for Thorne, for a few of them, the ones everyone knew about, the ones management protected. Annalise opened the folder. It was filled with small, neatly folded pieces of paper. Cocktail napkins, pages torn from notepads, the backs of receipts. On each one was a handwritten note, a date, a flight number, a name, a brief, factual description of an incident she had witnessed or heard about directly from a colleague. Oct 12, 2018, Felt 451, CPT, Thorne. Refused to let a young black man board with a skateboard as a carry-on, even though it fit in the sizer. Called him boy. Made him late for his own father's funeral. May 3, 2019, for 11:20, CPT, Thorne. Loudly berated a non-native English speaker for not understanding his instructions fast enough. Reduced her to tears in front of the whole cabin. Feb 22, 2021, Felty Thorne. Told another F.A. Brenda that her uniform was too tight for a woman her size. She filed a report. It went nowhere. She transferred to ground crew a month later. The folder was a secret history of casual cruelty, a meticulous, heartbreaking archive of abuses, small and large, that the official system had been designed to ignore. It was the box of evidence, compiled not with legal strategy, but with a patient, enduring sense of right and wrong. Why did you do this? Annalise asked, her voice soft. Because I believe in my profession, Margaret said, her gaze unwavering. We are supposed to be there for safety and comfort. We are ambassadors. Men like Thorne, they poison the well. They make a mockery of the uniform. I reported things through channels for years. Nothing happened, so I started keeping my own record. I didn't know what I'd ever do with it. Maybe I was just waiting for someone like you. This is invaluable, Margaret, Annalise said, looking down at the folder. This gives context and history to what happened to me yesterday. It proves a pattern. What happened to you yesterday, Margaret said, leaning forward slightly, was him getting sloppy, getting arrogant. He's been protected for so long he thinks he's untouchable. She paused. There's one more thing you should know. There's a guy in the compliance office at headquarters, Frank Miller. He's the one who had to process Brenda's complaint, the one that went nowhere. He's a good man, but he's trapped in the system. He's been waiting for a chance to burn it all down. If he knew the DOJ was really here, that you were here, he might be your insider. Annalise absorbed this new piece of information. The insider. The final, crucial archetype. Frank Miller, she repeated, committing the name to memory. She spent another hour with Margaret, going over the notes, asking clarifying questions. Margaret's memory was as precise as her records. She provided names, dates, and the institutional context for each incident. When they parted, Annalise felt as though she had been handed a master key. Back in her hotel room, she scanned every single note from Margaret's folder, adding them to the growing digital case file. She now had a timeline of abuse stretching back a decade, corroborated by an eyewitness, and a potential source inside the very department designed to prevent it. That afternoon, she composed another email. This one was to a general, anonymous tip line for the Apex Air Compliance Department, an address she found buried on their corporate website. To whom it may concern, I am in possession of documents detailing a pattern of misconduct by Captain Mark Thorne, spanning several years. I am also in possession of video evidence of an incident of passenger mistreatment that occurred on July 12 on Flight 71. I believe this evidence may be relevant to the work of honest employees within your department who feel constrained by the current system. If you are one of those employees and your name is Frank Miller, I suggest you check the public docket for DOJ Civil Rights Division, Case 774. Your integrity is valued. She did not sign her name. She didn't need to. The case number was a beacon. It was a signal to the insider that this was real, that institutional power had arrived. The weekend passed in quiet, intense preparation. Annalise and Ben Carter, working remotely, built a comprehensive and damning profile of not just Thorne, but of the entire system that enabled him. They cross-referenced Margaret's notes with the official records Ben had pulled. The pattern was undeniable. Complaints from certain demographics were systematically dismissed, while Thorne's own incident reports, which he filed preemptively after every confrontation, were taken as gospel. It was a perfect closed loop of institutional bias. The machine was working perfectly. On Sunday evening, a reply came to the anonymous email address she had used to contact the tip line. It was from a new, encrypted account. I'm Frank Miller. I've seen the docket. I've been waiting for this for 2 years. They are already preparing for your audit. The executive in charge is Paul Weiss, VP of Operations. He's Thorne's protector. He's the one who buried the complaints. They are planning to give you a sanitized tour, show you the new training manuals, and hide the real data. They think it's a routine checkup. Attached is a zip file. It contains the original unredacted complaint files against Thorne, including internal emails between Weiss and HR discussing how to manage the situations. It also contains Weiss's directive to my department to cleanse the data set before providing it to you for the audit. It's the smoking gun. Good luck. Give them hell. Annalise opened the file. It was everything Frank had promised and more. Emails, memos, a clear, documented conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation and cover up years of abuse. She felt a grim satisfaction. The trap was now set. All the pieces were in place. Monday morning arrived, cool and overcast, the day of the audit. Annalise dressed in a dark gray suit, the silver scales of justice pinned to her lapel. She looked every inch the federal judge she had once been. Her briefcase felt heavy in her hand, weighted with the truth. Ben Carter had flown in from D.C. the night before. He met her in the lobby. A young man with a sharp suit and an even sharper mind, his eyes bright with a crusading zeal. "Morning, Judge. You ready?" "More than ready, Ben," she said. They took a taxi to the massive gleaming headquarters of Apex Air. The building was a monument to corporate power, all glass and steel and soaring atriums. They announced themselves to the front desk and were escorted to the executive floor to a large, opulent conference room. The table was polished to a mirror shine, set with pitchers of ice water and branded notepads. 3 men were waiting for them. One was a corporate lawyer. The other 2 were executives. The man in the center, with a broad, confident smile and an expensive suit, stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Judge Hayes, a pleasure. I'm Paul Weiss, VP of Operations. We are so glad to have you. We're proud of the progress we've made and are an open book." His handshake was firm, his smile unwavering. He was the picture of corporate confidence, the systemic enabler. Annalise took his hand. Her grip was cool and steady. "Mr. Weiss, thank you for your welcome. This is my colleague Ben Carter." They all sat. Weiss launched into a smooth practice presentation, full of charts and metrics about improved customer satisfaction scores and new diversity and inclusion training modules. He spoke of Apex Air as a family, a team committed to excellence. It was a masterful performance of corporate spin. Annalise listened patiently, her hands folded on the table. She did not interrupt. She let him talk for a full 20 minutes. She let him build his own scaffold. When he was finally finished, he smiled again. "So, as you can see, the consent decree has been a great success. We're a new Apex Air now. We've prepared a schedule for your 21 days, beginning with a tour of our new training facilities." Annalise held up a hand. The gesture was small, but it stopped him cold. "Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Weiss. It was very thorough. However, we're going to have to deviate from your proposed schedule." Weiss's smile tightened by a millimeter. "Oh, how so?" "My audit will not be a general review," Annalise said, her voice quiet but filling the vast room. "It will be a specific case study, a deep dive into one particular set of circumstances to test the resilience and integrity of your entire system, from the tarmac to this boardroom." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single slim file. She placed it on the polished table. "We're going to begin with a review of the complete service and complaint record of one of your senior pilots, a Captain Mark Thorne." The name dropped into the room like a stone into a still pond. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Weiss's confident mask didn't slip, but something in his eyes went hard and flat. "Captain Thorne is one of our most experienced pilots. I can't imagine what relevance his file would have to a systemic audit." "On the contrary," Annalise said. "His file is the perfect lens through which to view your system, because I was his most recent complaint." She let that statement hang in the air for a full 5 seconds. The silence was profound. "Ben," she said without taking her eyes off Weiss, "play the video." Ben Carter turned his laptop around. The screen came to life. The shaky cell phone video was clear. The audio was crisp. The stale air of the jet bridge, her own calm face, and Captain Thorne, his face a mask of contempt. "This isn't for you." The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the silent conference room. It echoed. Weiss's face, for the first time, lost its composure. The color drained from it. He stared at the screen, at the pieces of the boarding pass fluttering to the floor. "That video was taken 3 days ago," Annalise stated, "when Captain Thorne illegally denied me boarding on a flight I was taking to come here and conduct this audit." She pushed the file forward. "This is the preliminary file we have compiled on Captain Thorne. It includes 17 prior informal complaints and 4 formal complaints, all of which were systematically dismissed or buried by your airline. Complaints that, had they been acted upon, would have prevented the incident 3 days ago." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "And this," she said as Ben placed another thicker file on the table, "is a copy of the original unredacted complaint file, along with internal communications directing your staff to conceal this information from the Department of Justice. A flagrant violation of the consent decree, and more seriously, a potential criminal conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation." Weiss stared at the files as if they were venomous snakes. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The corporate lawyer was pale, already mentally calculating the astronomical fines, the potential for criminal charges. The machine had broken. The gears had ground to a halt. "We will be starting this audit," Annalise announced, "by interviewing you, Mr. Weiss, under oath, about your role in covering up Captain Thorne's behavior. Then we will be interviewing every person who signed off on dismissing these complaints. And then we will be interviewing Captain Thorne himself." As if on cue, the doors to the conference room opened. 2 men and a woman in dark suits entered. They did not look like corporate employees. They moved with a quiet, unmistakable purpose. They were from the FBI. "Paul Weiss," the lead agent said. "We have a warrant to seize all records, electronic and physical. related to DOJ case number 774A, and we need you to come with us." Weiss looked from the agents to Annalise. In her calm, steady gaze, he saw no triumph, no gloating. He saw only the dispassionate, inexorable force of the law he had tried to subvert. The system he had so expertly manipulated to protect the guilty had been turned against him with devastating precision. The reckoning was swift. Paul Weiss resigned before he was fired, his departure part of a sealed agreement with federal prosecutors in exchange for his testimony. Frank Miller, the insider, was granted whistleblower protection and became a key witness, helping the DOJ unravel the years of systemic rot. Supervisor Henderson, the man who had offered Annalise a middle seat in economy, was fired for his role in failing to report the incident properly. And Captain Mark Thorne? He was met by FAA officials and airport police as he deplaned from a return flight from London. He was served with a notice of an emergency suspension of his pilot's license, pending a full investigation. He was informed he was the subject of a federal civil rights probe. As he was escorted through the terminal, stripped of his authority, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief, he passed gate C-28. The irony was a quiet, brutal poetry. He was being led away, his career in ruins, by the very same authority he had so arrogantly wielded against Annalise just days before. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of casual cruelty, and it had crumbled to dust with a single quiet act of resistance. 21 days later, the audit was complete. Annalise and her team had produced a report so damning, so meticulously documented, that Apex Air had no choice but to agree to a new, far more stringent consent decree. It mandated a complete overhaul of their internal complaint system, the establishment of a fully independent civilian oversight board, and millions of dollars in funding for new training programs and community outreach. The machine was being forcibly redesigned. Annalise's flight home was booked on Apex Air, Flight 710 from DFW to DCA. She had seat 2A. When she walked down the jet bridge, the same stale, cool air greeting her, she felt a sense of profound quiet. A new captain stood at the door, a younger man with a warm, respectful smile. "Welcome aboard, Judge Hayes," he said. "It's an honor to have you with us." She took her seat, the spacious pod by the window. The flight attendant, a woman she didn't recognize, offered her a pre-departure drink. "Water would be lovely." "Thank you," she said. As the plane pushed back from the gate, she looked out the window at the sprawling airport. The world looked different now. The same but different. The fight had been won. Not just for her, but for the dozens of people in Margaret's secret folder, for the thousands of passengers who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or unworthy. The plane climbed into the vast Texas sky, banking east toward home. Annalise leaned her head back against the soft leather and closed her eyes. She did not feel victorious. She felt a quiet, reflective peace. The work was done. Justice in this one small corner of the world had been served. Not with rage, but with precision. Not with shouting, but with the undeniable power of the truth. She thought of her father, and she hoped he would have been proud. The next morning, she was back in her armchair, in her brownstone in D.C. The first light of dawn, the color of weak tea, filtered through the window. The smell of her dark roast coffee filled the quiet room. It was the same ritual, the same stillness, but she was not the same. The fortress of her dignity had been tested, and it had held, and in doing so, it had given shelter to countless others. She took a slow sip of her coffee. The work continues. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.